that America was prophesied to have lamb-like qualities. There's another prophecy about America in Revelation 13 we're going to see in the next session. But it's important to make clear what that does not mean. When you see a lamb-like nation and you see God's interpositions of providence, we may be tempted to swing a little far in that description and go, okay, well, a lamb-like nation is a Christian nation. America is one nation under God. In God we trust. These are important themes, but what does that mean and what does that not mean? We've got to walk a tightrope here, because this is an important thing to not go into the way that Constantine was or the way that papal Rome was. Simply put, when you read America's founding documents, you read the Declaration of Independence, for example, you see an acknowledgement of a higher power than the state. That's important. A higher power than the government. God is the one who has endowed us with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But you also see, in the Constitution particularly, that enforcement of religion is absolutely prohibited. The Constitution tells the government, leave religion alone. So that's the definition of a Christian nation, of a lamb-like nation. Not Christian rule by enforcement of Christianity at gunpoint. That would not be Christian, because Christian is that which follows Christ. What did Jesus say? Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, it's the rulers of the Gentiles that lord it over them. Worldly, unbelievers lord it over others, and they exercise great authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, if you're a Christian, be a servant. That's a different mindset, isn't it? He says the Gentile way is to have dominion over others, to lord it over others, to enforce edicts and dictates. And for over 1,000 years, you had so-called Christian nations in Europe where governments existed that were not lamb-like at all, but they claimed to be Christian. They were taking cues from Rome. So you don't actually want Christianity to try to rule. It's just not at its best. It's not being Christian when it's the Constantinian way of, it's called dominion theology. It's repugnant to the reader of the New Testament to think that we would say kill or conquer in the sign of the cross as Constantine did. So what makes America exceptional and distinct and different then? Well, it is a system that neither denies God nor enforces God. You see the tightrope here? So we acknowledge a Creator who has endowed us with our liberties. And we do the Christian thing and allow people's freedom of conscience to choose ye this day whom ye shall serve. Yet at the same time, we don't enforce the religion that we know to be true, because that would be a betrayal of that very religion. Romanism enforces religion, and a false one at that, right? We talked extensively about that in 7 Deadly Myths. But there are other types of governments that go to the opposite extreme over here, deny God completely, and then the state becomes God. Have you heard of socialism, Marxism, communism? Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, and we need to outlaw it completely, because that detracts from our theological meta-narrative, which is class struggle. It's all about class struggle, and that is where we want people to focus, that the proletariat would overthrow the bourgeoisie, and that the people who are having being alienated from their right just deserts would get them back from the evil capitalist owners of the capital. That was his sort of view that was replacing religion. Well, you also hear of cultural Marxism. That's another way of sowing division along lines other than class division. It would be along sexual orientation, gender identity, these kind of things. You divide society according to the villains and the virtuous, and we're going to recapture power from the supposed oppressors. So whatever Marxism, socialism, communism, cultural Marxism, these are all secular ideologies that enforce secularism. They replace Christianity and the God of heaven with a different ideology or narrative for good and evil, and end up almost all the time viciously opposed, violently opposed to Bible-believing Christianity. Even if sometimes they wear the veneer of sort of this liberation theology and using Christian language, it's a dangerous, dangerous development over the last 100+ years. And there was another revolution too. Around the time of the American Revolution, that was a godless revolution. It denied God. It was an atheistic revolution. Do you know which one I'm talking about? This is a famous one. You read about this one in the book, The Great Controversy, because you read about the French Revolution in 1789. It was very destructive to life and to liberty. It ushered in the Reign of Terror, the guillotine, eventually Napoleonic France in its wake. Now, that's not to say that the people who the French were overthrowing are good guys necessarily, because that's the monarchy and that's papal Rome and the priest class of France. These revolutionaries were responding to that, so that was almost the catalyst for this revolution to begin with, not to excuse either, but the Dark Ages was a time of oppressive religious power, ruling by the sword for centuries. The Bible in the common tongue was outlawed in Europe. You had these pockets of Christians like the Waldenses who were keeping to the primitive faith. You had bold men like John Huss coming out and saying, no, we must believe in the Bible and make the Bible available to people in their language. And they were burned at the stake. They were persecuted. Then you get the Protestant Reformation that begins in 1517. Entire nations start breaking from Rome, Germany, the German princes with Luther. You get Switzerland and Geneva with Calvin and Zwingli. You get Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands. So we're starting to see some free places and Protestantism being allowed in Europe. France didn't go there, though. John Calvin attempted a Reformation in France, a courageous man. His efforts at Reformation in France were destroyed by the Catholic and French authorities, by the monarchy, by the priest class, by the papacy. He fled to Geneva, Switzerland, and the Protestants who did remain in France, called the Huguenots, they were terribly persecuted. And many of them fled to the Netherlands. Interesting, just like side note, just personal side note for me. When I told you guys last night that my ancestors were from the Netherlands, a lot of that lineage is actually Huguenot. So the Huguenots who had fled France intermarried with the Dutch. I had a grandpa who was really into history, and he would trace the genealogy and stuff. So I happen to know got some French Huguenot in there too. But nonetheless, that's just a fun fact. Not an amazing fact. It wasn't that amazing. Anyway, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Okay, so this was the moment in European history that solidified in the minds of all Protestants, all people of conscience in Europe, that papal Rome was a bloody and ruthless force. They cracked down on these Huguenots and anybody who defied the Church of Rome in France with violent, violent massacre. Tens of thousands of Bible-believing Christians were slaughtered. So let's say this as clearly as possible. Christianity that attempts to rule with the sword and enforce its dogma is not Christianity. The Bible calls it Antichrist. So when the French Revolution is overthrowing that, the problem with them was they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They thought they were throwing out Christianity itself. They were throwing out Christianity itself. They thought they were just throwing out oppression. But they viewed religion itself as bad, kind of like Marx would, right? Karl Marx. Religion itself is inherently, violently oppressive. We've got to get rid of all religion, they said. They couldn't see past the fact that the particular brand of Christianity, Antichrist, that had persecuted them, it was betraying the Bible. And if you allow true Christianity to thrive, you will find tolerance, freedom, peace. So, lesson learned here, I guess. Satan is a master of having two opposites, both of which are equally evil. Are you seeing what I'm saying here? You've got dominion theology, papal Rome, Constantinian violent domination, versus atheistic mass murder. They're both kind of bad, aren't they? What is this all about? Listen to this from the Great Controversy. In that grand old document, which our forefathers set forth as their Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, they declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are," what's the next word there? Created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The French Revolution didn't acknowledge that there was a Creator that endowed every person with their rights, and so their rights were surrendered and sacrificed. So God here is neither denied nor enforced, right? The authoritarian secularist state is not God. God is God. There is a Creator, and you have liberty to choose Him. Over here, there's no church state either in the American system, no official church, state, religion. You have liberty, no enforcement. We all know this too. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident. This is something everybody intuitively knows. When you look at history and you go, yeah, this is unalienable. To have your life and liberty respected, your freedom of conscience validated and left alone. That is something that we all know to be right, and it's unalienable, can't be taken away. So summing up, the American Republic, founded by Protestants, acknowledged the Creator with no enforcement of religion and no restricting of freedom of conscience. So is it any surprise to us then that this land, America, not France, not Rome, became the wellspring of the 19th century missionary work that went global, the very prolific Bible societies distributing the Word of God, and what we're going to talk about this afternoon, the Great Second Advent Awakening. I put that one in highlighted yellow, the only slide you'll see the whole weekend with that, because that is really what this is all about lifting up the name of Jesus Christ, His character, and proclaiming His soon coming. We've got to look now at the Founding Fathers who wrote this American Constitution based on which colony's way of viewing things. You had Virginia, that was an Anglican colony. It became Episcopal after the Revolution, broke from England, but a church state. You had Maryland, a Catholic colony. You had various colonies, usually a religion assigned to it. Massachusetts, of course, Connecticut, they were Puritan colonies. When the Constitution was written and when the Constitution was ratified, did the United States of America become a denominational entity? Have you ever read in the First Amendment to the Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Hands off that. And you shouldn't prohibit the free exercise of religion either. Hands off in both ways. So you don't establish a religion or prohibit free exercise of religion like they do over here in these atheistic nations, or like they do with this Roman papal model that many of the Protestants sadly didn't quite break from. But the Founding Fathers didn't follow the Massachusetts Bay Colony approach. They followed the Plymouth Colony, or if you will, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. Roger Williams, love that guy.